In a world where rivers govern the landscape and shape the life around them, there exists one whose grandeur knows no bounds. Where does this aquatic artery begin, nourished by clouds and legends? The Amazon, one of the longest and most voluminous rivers on the planet, originates in the heart of the Andes, amidst snow-capped peaks where the air is thin and clear. It is there, in the silence of the Peruvian mountains, that a modest stream of crystal-clear water begins its journey. This source may seem inconspicuous, but it marks the start of a grandiose voyage stretching over 6,400 km. Initially, the water flows leisurely through narrow valleys, meandering between mountain slopes. Gradually, it gathers strength, merging with other streams, transforming into a rushing torrent, and then into a true giant. The Marañón River, the Ucayali River, these names appear in the chronicles of explorers, each striving to claim the discovery of the Amazon source. Which of these places is the true beginning of the Great River? The answer to this question holds many more mysteries and discoveries. The Amazon, contrary to common perceptions, is a complex system of rivers and branches whose dynamics resemble a living being. It continuously transforms, changes its course, sometimes swelling in flood, sometimes shrinking in drought. Crossing the equatorial line, this aquatic artery collects the waters of countless tributaries, turning into a river whose width during the rainy season can reach an impressive 50 kilometers. Imagine a ship sailing down the center of the river, with the banks lost somewhere beyond the horizon. In certain sections, looking into the distance, an observer might think they are facing not a river, but a boundless lake or even an inland sea. In the depths of the Amazon, live giant catfish, exotic pink dolphins, dangerous electric eels, huge anacondas, and an incalculable number of organisms yet unknown to science. This river is not just a geographical object, but the living heart of the South American continent, an artery carrying water, life, and mysteries through the densest and greenest expanses of the planet. The rainforests stretching along the banks of the Amazon are often called the lungs of the earth, and it is becoming increasingly clear that humanity cannot exist without these forests. However, the river itself is much older than both nature and man. It has witnessed the rise and fall of great civilizations. Its waters reflect the clouds floating over the jungles since time immemorial. For those who stand on its banks, the Amazon is not just a watercourse, but a wall of sounds, vapors, movements, an entire universe in constant motion, alive and immense. The river embodies a dual essence. Sometimes it is gentle and welcoming, like a morning breeze, and sometimes it becomes a source of deadly threat, harboring sudden floods, predatory inhabitants of the depths, and fever transmitted through mosquito bites. Its origins lie in silence, but it never falls silent itself. The river speaks in a multi-voiced chorus of frogs, the rustling of leaves, the rumble of thunder, and the plaintive moans during storms. If you listen carefully to its voice, sitting on a wooden pier in the pre-dawn darkness, you can catch echoes of antiquity, a call that sounded here long before the first settlements arose and before man learned to build boats. Chapter 2, The River with 1,000 Names. Before the name Amazon appeared on European maps, this aquatic artery was known by many other names, each expressing the fear, reverence, and love of the peoples inhabiting its banks. For the Tupi tribes, it was Paranatinga, the majestic white water. For the Pano peoples, the Cuyara River. The Incas, whose empire only partially touched the borders of its basin, perceived it as a mysterious and dangerous boundary of the world, beyond which lay unexplored territory. The modern name, Amazon, was first uttered by the Spanish conquistador Francisco de Orellana in 1542. He became the first European to travel down the river from the Peruvian Andes to the Atlantic Ocean. It is said that during his journey, the expedition encountered a warlike tribe of women who demonstrated exceptional courage and martial skill in battle. Inspired by images from ancient Greek mythology, Juan de Orellana drew a parallel between these warriors and the Amazons, the legendary people of female warriors who lived in the vicinity of the Pontus Euxinus. Thus, the name that would later become established and enter world geography first appeared in European chronicles. However, this name, like a ceremonial robe, covered the countless ancient names by which the river was called by its indigenous inhabitants. In tribal cultures, there was no single fixed name. Each community had its own name for the river, reflecting its character in a particular area. In some places, it was known as the River of Spirits, in others as the River of Death, and in others as the Nurturing Mother or the Road Between Worlds. The name could change depending on the time of year, weather conditions, or the shaman's mood. The river was perceived not just as a geographical object, but as a living being. In many myths of the Amazonian peoples, the river appears as the trace of a giant snake that crawled across the sky and earth, leaving a stream of water behind. In other legends, it is the body of a dead god, from whose veins originate the rivers that feed the forest. Some legends say that if you follow the river's course for a long time, you can reach the place where the water disappears into the sky and turn into a spirit. A name is not just a label, it is a symbol of power. Possessing the true name of a being is tantamount to controlling it. It is not surprising that shamans, fearing the wrath of the river, avoided pronouncing the name of the Amazon aloud. They resorted to metaphors, calling it she who moves under the sky, the wet path, or the river that carries songs. Various tribes created their own appeals in the form of songs, praying to the river for favor, a rich catch, protection from floods, and preservation of the banks. Even Europeans did not immediately come to a consensus regarding the name. The Portuguese called it Rio das Amazonas, and the Spanish called it Rio Grande. On old maps of the 16th and 17th centuries, you can find many variations, from Rio Marañón to Rio de la Orellana. The name of the river served as a reflection not only of its geographical path, but also of the fears, hopes, and mythology of the peoples who crossed it. Some saw it as a path to untold riches, others as a road to paradise, and still others as salvation from the despotic rule of the metropolis. Today, we habitually call it the Amazon, short, convenient, and commonplace. However, one only needs to close their eyes and imagine the fog swirling over the vast waters, the sound of rain in the treetops, and the echo of ancient songs to realize this is not just a name, but a mask, hiding countless meanings, images, and stories lost in the depths of centuries, but still living in the breath of the forest. The Amazon is a name behind which eternity lies. And even if we are not destined to know all its true names, every splash of a wave at dawn reminds us it hears and remembers everything. Chapter 3. The Power of Green, Civilizations Before Columbus. Long before the triumphant arrival of Spanish ships to the shores of America, the lands of the Amazon were already teeming with life. Historical perceptions of the Amazon as a desolate jungle, where nomadic tribes with bows wandered in the shade of trees, are today being seriously revised under the onslaught of scientific data. Archaeological discoveries, research using satellite technology, soil analysis, and the study of forest structure convincingly prove that complex and well-organized societies flourished along the banks of the Great River. These peoples inhabited vast territories and left behind traces so subtle and scattered that nature almost completely hid them from view. Some scientists tend to call these societies green empires, emphasizing their unique connection with the environment. Unlike the stone cities of the Incas or Mayans, their settlements were built of wood, clay, and plant fibers, harmoniously fitting into the landscape. Their roads were not carved in stone, but were trodden through vegetation and covered with organic materials, creating living paths. Their pyramids, unlike monumental stone structures, were earthen mounds, which over time turned into green hills indistinguishable from the natural relief. Despite such organic integration into nature, these were fully fledged civilizations with a developed social structure, agriculture, trade relations, religious beliefs, and unique architecture that reflected their deep connection with the environment. The so-called Black Earth, or terra preta, a soil created by human hands, makes an indelible impression. By mixing organic matter, charcoal, and other components, the ancient inhabitants of the Amazon created a unique soil cover. Remarkably, this soil was not only highly fertile, but also became even more saturated with beneficial elements over time. Researchers suggest that terra preta sites could have served not only as fields and gardens, but also as sacred places where rituals and ceremonies were performed. This phenomenon serves as convincing evidence that the indigenous peoples of the Amazon did not simply adapt to the conditions of the rainforests, but actively managed them, forming sustainable ecosystems capable of existing for centuries. In northwestern Brazil and Bolivia, archaeologists have discovered traces of complex geometric structures such as circles, squares, and roads connecting various sites. Some of these structures are combined into networks stretching for hundreds of kilometers. These structures, crafted from earth and known as geoglyphs, become visible only from a bird's eye view, sparking hypotheses about their astronomical or ritualistic purpose. However, the most significant aspect is that they demonstrate organized planning, complex calculations, and coordination among different communities. These facts irrefutably prove that the Amazonian tribes were numerous, diverse, and possessed advanced social organization. On the banks of the majestic rivers, tribes settled, whose primary occupation was fishing and agriculture, while in the dense forests, hunters and gatherers lived, extracting food and resources from nature's generous gifts. There were also skilled artisans focused on crafting ceramic items, exquisite fabrics, and decorations from feathers and shells. These unique items served as valuable commodities for exchange for salt, fresh fish, fragrant honey, and rare types of wood, so necessary in everyday life. Some tribes built amazing floating villages. Their houses, like bird nests, rested on stilts, rising above the wetlands and providing reliable protection from floods. The culture and religious beliefs of these peoples were inextricably linked to the world of spirits inhabiting the forests, rivers, and stars. Every tree, every animal, every sound coming from the depths of the jungle was shrouded in legends and myths. Oral traditions carefully preserved knowledge of glorious ancestors, the art of using the medicinal plants, ways to appease the rain, and predict the whims of river flows. Shamans, like bridges between worlds, played an important role in community life. They healed ailments, guided on the right path, performed initiation rites, and, in certain situations, made wise political decisions. Their invaluable knowledge was passed down from generation to generation through melodious songs and prophetic dreams. According to modern researchers' estimates, before the arrival of Europeans, about 10 million people lived in the Amazon basin, which is comparable to the population of some European countries at the turn of the 16th and 17th centuries. And these were not scattered nomads huddled in lonely huts, but thriving and sustainable communities, connected by a network of roads, waterways, and common cultural traditions. In the heart of the Amazon, a unique civilization flourished, whose building material was not the solidity of stone or the glitter of metal, but the living greenery of the rainforest. It harmoniously intertwined with the surrounding world without trying to subdue it. When the first Spanish and Portuguese explorers penetrated this uncharted land, their amazement knew no bounds. In their travel notes, they noted a continuous series of settlements stretching along the riverbanks for many weeks. However, only a few decades later, these testimonies began to seem like nothing more than a beautiful legend. The reason for this was diseases brought by Europeans: smallpox, influenza, measles. These invisible killers wiped out up to 90% of the indigenous population, leaving them no chance of resistance or adaptation. Villages disappeared from the face of the earth, swallowed up by the jungles, paths became overgrown, and an ominous silence reigned. Only today is humanity beginning to realize the full extent of this tragedy. The Amazon held traces of civilizations that we hardly suspected existed, but listening to its whisper, we can still feel their presence. The shadow of a once thriving city may be hidden in the bend of an abandoned path, in the bizarre shape of an ancient tree, in an inconspicuous hill densely overgrown with lianas. Their songs may still sound in the rhythm of the tropical rain. Chapter 4 tells the story of Francisco de Orellana's first expedition and the discovery of the Amazon River in 1541. The Spanish Empire was in the era of the conquistadors, a time of unrestrained greed and myths. The Spanish conquerors had already conquered Mexico, crushed the mighty Inca Empire, discovered the majestic Andes and rich Peru, but their thirst for profit and new lands was insatiable. In the picturesque mountain ranges and fertile valleys of South America, exciting legends about the mythical land of gold. El Dorado, a dazzling city where every corner seemed to be strewn with precious metal, from paved streets and majestic palaces to the bodies of citizens, continued to circulate. As European explorers penetrated deeper into uncharted territories, their imaginations flared, painting ever more incredible pictures. One of those who dared to go in search of this enticing dream was Francisco de Orellana, a native of Spain, born in 1511. Being a distant relative of the famous conqueror of Peru, Pizarro, he soon moved to the New World, first settling in Nicaragua, and then in Peru, where he took an active part in the bloody battles with the Incas. By 1540, Orellana was honored to govern the city of Guayaquil, located on the coast of modern-day Ecuador. Yet his ambitious aspirations extended far beyond the modest tasks of colonial administration. And when his longtime comrade in arms, Gonzalo Pizarro, announced preparations for a large-scale expedition east into the uncharted lands beyond the majestic Andes, Orellana joined this daring enterprise without hesitation. The expedition commenced in February 1541, gathering under its banners an impressive force. Approximately 300 Spanish soldiers, 4,000 indigenous porters, numerous horses, a formidable arsenal of gunpowder and swords, priests, chroniclers, substantial food supplies, and boundless confidence in success. In pursuit of the unknown, the pioneers set out from Quito, forging their way through mountain ranges and humid rainforests, into lands where no European had yet set foot. They were lured by the legend of El Dorado, as well as the hope of finding lands abundant with cinnamon, as recounted by the indigenous people. However, fate had other plans, and their ambitions were soon shattered by harsh reality. Impassable trails, debilitating heat and humidity, as well as rampant diseases and severe food shortages, led to the demise of many. Death crept in the form of poisonous insect bites, debilitating fevers, and starvation. Local guides seemed to vanish into the jungle, leaving the expedition to its fate. Horses, which served as a means of transportation and draft power, along with most of the supplies, became the only source of survival. By the end of 1541, only a small group of exhausted people remained from the once imposing expedition. In a desperate attempt to survive, it was decided to divide the detachment. A portion, led by Orellana, was to descend the river on a hastily built vessel in search of food and the opportunity to return for the others. But the river, which turned out to be much more powerful and dangerous than anyone could have imagined, made its own adjustments to their plans. Orellana and about 50 of his companions began their journey down the river, which was destined to become the legendary Amazon. The irresistible current deprived them of the opportunity to return. Supplies dwindled rapidly. It became clear that the only way was to move forward into the unknown. Thus began one of the most incredible odysseys in human history. Moving along the uncharted river, the Spaniards found themselves in places where dense thickets closed overhead, where the air was filled with the deafening cries of exotic birds, where monkeys, like mischievous spirits of the jungle, threw branches down from the trees, and tribes of indigenous people, hidden in the shadows, kept silent watch over the strangers. At times, exhausted by the long voyage, the pioneers would dock on the shore to light a life-giving fire, find edible roots, and obtain food in the river waters. But often they were in mortal danger, ambushes by warlike tribes, and then the silence of the jungle was broken by cries in unknown languages, the whistle of arrows, and the gleam of flames. In February 1542, the flotilla reached a vast stretch of the river, where they met fierce resistance. Gaspar de Carvajal, the expedition's chronicler, tells of an attack by detachments of fearless women warriors, who showered the Spaniards with a hail of arrows and skillfully directed the course of the battle. The astonished conquistadors saw tall, strong women whose courage and martial art surpassed the courage of a dozen men. Impressed by what he saw, Orellana, inspired by ancient myths, named these warriors Amazons, and this name subsequently became attached to the entire Great River. In June 1542, after covering over 6,000 kilometers in 7 long months, Orellana reached the mouth of the river, where its waters merged with the Atlantic Ocean. He went down in history as the first European to dare to cross South America along its waterways, connecting the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. And although the thirst for gold and legendary cities was not quenched, Orellana's journey itself became the greatest geographical discovery, forever changing the perception of the world. The triumphant return to Europe was marked by enthusiastic receptions. Orellana presented his report full of stories about the great warrior peoples, the untold riches of the jungle, and the incredible width of the river, which amazed the imagination of Europeans. Monarch Charles V granted him the right to develop lands along the Amazon River, but the second expedition, which started in 1545, turned into a disaster. Orellana passed away, struck down by illness in the delta of the river, without having time to lay the foundations of the colonies. And yet, despite the legends and embellishments, Orellana accomplished a feat that seemed unreal. His journey marked the discovery of the Amazon for European civilization, marking the beginning of a new era of exploration, conquest, and disaster. But for the river, ancient, imperturbable, and immortal, it was just a fleeting event. Even then, she was aware that generations of people replaced one another, while her waters continued to carry leaves, memories, and mysteries to the ocean. Chapter 5, Gold Rush and Clouded Judgment, in search of El Dorado. From the 15th century, and for several centuries thereafter, the word El Dorado sounded like a magic spell to Europeans. It symbolized not just wealth, but absolute prosperity, an unattainable dream, the embodiment of a world where gold was not a rarity, but the very essence of existence. And at a time when Europe was experiencing economic hardship, religious conflicts, and social upheaval, the New World in the minds of many seemed like an almost fabulous continent, full of wonders, wild peoples, and untold treasures. And Amazonia, vast, unexplored, stretching beyond the boundaries of maps, became the setting for the saddest and most incredible gold hunt in human history. The word El Dorado takes its roots in the Spanish language, namely from the phrase El Dorado, which translates to the Gilded One. Initially, this concept was associated with the ancient ritual of the Muisca people, who inhabited the lands of modern Colombia. Legend has it that their leader, like a statue, covered his body with glittering gold dust, and on an elaborately crafted raft, went to the heart of the sacred lake Guatavita. There, in the silence of the waters, he made sacrifices to the spirits, throwing precious treasures into the abyss. The Spanish conquistadors, struck by the stories of this rite, created in their imagination a completely different image. Instead of a ritual act, they imagined a fabulous city, then a powerful empire, and then an entire civilization, where gold in abundance lay under their feet like ordinary road dust. The first expeditions in search of El Dorado were directed to the mountainous regions of the Andes, then to the Orinoco River Basin, and then to the vast eastern territories. However, the further the conquerors advanced into the unexplored lands, the clearer they realized that if El Dorado existed, it should be sought in the very heart of the impenetrable jungle, along the course of the mysterious river. The Amazon turned into a real labyrinth, full of not only physical trials, such as exhausting humidity, swarms of insects, and dangerous diseases, but also metaphysical uncertainty. Each turn of the river could become either the beginning of a new legend or the end of a long and difficult journey. Following Orellana, many groups of adventurers tried to repeat his dangerous route. Some dreamed of finding traces of the legendary women warriors. Others craved gold and riches, and still others sought to find mythical cities shrouded in mystery. In 1560, one of the most tragic pages in the history of geographical discoveries unfolded. The Spanish conquistador Pedro de Ursua led a detachment of 300 men into the South American jungle, seeking to repeat Orellana's journey and find the legendary El Dorado. However, the expedition faced a sad end. A mutiny broke out in the Spanish camp, led by Lope de Aguirre. This adventurer, obsessed with the thirst for power and gold, massacred Ursua, seized command, and declared himself the wrath of God, Prince of Freedom. He defiantly rejected the authority of the Spanish crown, proclaimed the creation of his own state, and led the remnants of the expedition down the Amazon. The campaign turned into a series of brutal murders, madness, and even cases of cannibalism. Lope de Aguirre became the personification of a man who lost his mind in pursuit of mirages, forever lost in the impenetrable thickets of the selva. The myth of El Dorado spawned not only fear and despair, but also inspired feats. Not only the Spanish, but also the English yearned for the golden dream. At the end of the 16th century, Sir Walter Raleigh, who enjoyed the special favor of Queen Elizabeth I, organized an expedition to the banks of the Orinoco River, hoping to find a fabulous city. He returned to England, filled with hope, with poetic sketches and detailed reports, assuring that he had seen undeniable evidence of the existence of the richest and most beautiful kingdom on earth. His stories inspired a whole generation of English writers and cartographers. Raleigh even published a book entitled The Discovery of the Large, Rich, and Beautiful Empire of Guyana, in which he convinced readers of the reality of El Dorado, awaiting its conqueror. In 1610, he made another attempt to reach the cherished goal, but this expedition turned into a complete failure. The tragic death of his son and the subsequent arrest, initiated by the Spanish crown, led Sir Walter Raleigh to the scaffold. But the legend of the Golden El Dorado continued to stir minds. Each failed expedition only added mystery to this mythical place. Some argued that it was not a city, but a sacred temple hidden in the depths of the waters. Others were inclined to believe that El Dorado is not a geographical point, but an embodiment of an ideal culture, where gold has no value and people live in harmony with themselves and the world. Some even saw El Dorado as a metaphor for inner transformation, arguing that the jungle, with its dangers and wonders, could cleanse and uplift the human soul. Despite the variety of interpretations, the search for El Dorado never ceased. The Amazon, like a wise and patient witness, silently watched boats glide along its waters, carrying people consumed by the thirst for gold. The river accepted their sacrifices, swallowed their ships, and wove their stories into its eternal murmur. Only a few managed to return. Most disappeared without a trace into its vastness. At the bottom of the Amazon, Spanish armor, blades, religious symbols, and vessels filled with precious gold dust may still rest. Today, archaeologists, using modern technologies such as satellite imagery and LiDAR, are discovering traces of ancient settlements, roads, and geometric structures beneath the dense jungle canopy, testifying to the existence of an advanced civilization. At times, their grandeur is truly astonishing, forcing many to re-examine established ideas and myths. Perhaps the legend of El Dorado is not just a beautiful fairy tale, but an echo of memories of once thriving cities, erased from the face of the earth by relentless time and all-consuming jungles. And perhaps their treasures lay not only in the glitter of precious metal, but also in their rich cultural and spiritual heritage. And yet, what if, in the very heart of the impenetrable forests, behind a veil of raging waterfalls, far from the prying eyes of maps and all-seeing satellites, there is still a place where the dust itself sparkles with gold, where the walls of buildings shimmer under the streams of rain, and warlike women, like guards, watch from beneath the dense thickets of vines. Perhaps El Dorado has not yet been discovered because it cannot be found by force of arms, but only in dreams, only by those who are ready to trust the flow of the river, like a weightless leaf, surrendering to its will and allowing it to carry them wherever it wishes. Chapter 6. In the Heart of the Jungle, Mysterious Cities of Amazonia. For centuries, the Amazon has been seen as a chaotic, impenetrable territory, a wild kingdom of nature where the very existence of civilization seemed impossible. However, in its depths, under the cover of lush vines, in the interweaving of mighty tree roots, beneath the layers of time and earth, lie traces of ancient cities, not fictional, but quite real, material, erected by human hands and subsequently swallowed by the forest and time. Modern archaeology, relying on advanced technologies such as satellite imagery and laser scanning, is radically changing the perception of the Amazon. Instead of an image of a wild and deserted thicket, we see a picture of a cultural landscape where civilizations flourished, possessing deep knowledge of ecology, geometry, and social organization. Since the end of the 20th century, with the advent of LiDAR technology, which allows penetrating dense vegetation with laser scanning, scientists have discovered hidden structures invisible to the naked eye. What was previously perceived as natural elements of the relief turned out to be giant geoglyphs. Circles, squares, rectangles, and spirals combined into complex systems stretching for hundreds of kilometers. These carefully leveled and dug-in-the-ground figures were obviously not created simply for decoration. They testify to deep knowledge in the field of geometry, navigation, and possibly astronomy. In the Mamoré River Basin in modern-day Bolivia, an extensive network of canals, embankments, and circular platforms was discovered. Some of these structures were surrounded by moats, others were connected by wide roads. All this splendor belonged to the Casarabe culture, which reached its peak between the 9th and 14th centuries AD. Ancient settlements in the Amazon rainforest appear to us not just as modest settlements, but as genuine metropolises, where life was in full swing and the population reached tens of thousands of people. Archaeological excavations generously give the world artifacts of a bygone civilization, the ruins of majestic buildings, complex water collection systems, and the remains of temples testifying to the spiritual life of the inhabitants. It is noteworthy that all these structures are harmoniously integrated into the environment, demonstrating a careful attitude to nature. The ancient builders did not destroy the forest, but skillfully used its resources and shelter. A special place in the history of Amazon exploration is occupied by the mysterious city of Z, sung by British officer and tireless explorer Percy Fawcett in the 20th century. He claimed that in the very heart of the Brazilian jungle between the Tapajós and Xingu rivers, there was an ancient stone city striking the imagination with its streets, arches, and towers, erected long before the arrival of Europeans on the continent. Fawcett, obsessed with the idea of finding Z, organized several expeditions, but in 1925 he set off on his last fateful expedition and disappeared without a trace with his son in the wilds of the Amazon. His mysterious disappearance spawned numerous legends, inspired writers and filmmakers to create captivating works, and spurred conspiracy theories and new search expeditions into the jungle. Fawcett's fate is still debated. Some believe he was a victim of hostile tribes, others a madman detached from reality, and still others a martyr of science who dared to look beyond the unknown. Equally enigmatic is the legend of Paititi, a lost Inca citadel, which, according to legend, is hidden in the impenetrable forests of eastern Peru or northern Bolivia. This myth excites the minds of researchers and treasure hunters, making them go in search of the treasures of ancient civilization again and again. Legend has it that after the tragic fall of Cusco in 1533, a handful of surviving members of the Inca nobility, driven by despair and hope, took refuge in the inaccessible mountain ranges. There, in the heart of the wilderness, they supposedly laid the foundation for a secret city designed to be an inviolable repository of the empire's untold treasures and ancient knowledge imprinted on glittering gold tablets. In this myth, as in a mirror, genuine historical events are reflected, intricately intertwined with rich Indian symbolism. Indeed, the Incas, fleeing imminent death, desperately tried to retreat to remote regions where they hoped to preserve their culture and traditions. But does the legendary Paititi really exist, or has it become merely a reflection of our own insatiable aspirations for elusive glory and immortality? Archaeological discoveries made in recent decades suggest that even if Paititi is just a beautiful fairy tale, structures remarkably similar to descriptions of legendary cities once existed in reality. In 2018, a group of scientists made a sensational discovery, finding more than 60,000 architectural objects under the dense jungles of the Petén region in Guatemala, including roads, residential buildings, defensive walls, and majestic pyramids. And although this territory belonged to the Mayan civilization, the find suggests that if the Maya were able to build cities in impenetrable forests, then other peoples could have possessed similar knowledge and skills. In the Brazilian state of Acre, archaeologists have discovered giant mounds and ancient settlements, the layout of which indicates the existence of a highly organized spatial management system. Some of these cities were surrounded by a complex network of irrigation canals and had spacious public squares, which may have been used for rituals and ceremonies. Scientists are increasingly talking about urbanized Amazonia, inhabited by dozens of different peoples, each of whom created their own unique version of life in harmony with the surrounding nature. In the depths of the Amazon jungle, like a giant open-air library, local tribes carefully pass down from generation to generation stories of mysterious stone giants, mysterious glowing towers, and star paths piercing the celestial vault. These stories, like Ariadne's threads, lead through the labyrinth of time to long-gone eras. Sometimes tribal elders share maps with the chosen few, covered with warning signs. They mark places where you should not step, where rivers suddenly disappear into the bowels of the earth, where abandoned dwellings store only the echo of long-silenced voices. Perhaps this is just colorful folklore, a whimsical play of imagination. But it is possible that these are echoes of past grandeur, a deep collective memory of cities wiped off the face of the earth, forgotten even by those who carry the blood of their builders within them. The Amazon forest is not a destroyer, but a keeper. It is like a wise old man who carefully hides the secrets of the past, absorbing them into himself like a sponge. The forest skillfully erases names, but preserves forms, outlines, and imprints of past civilization. A city may disappear from human memory, but its spirit continues to live in the interweaving of tree roots, in the bends of riverbeds, in the mysterious symmetry of hills and elevations. And every time a modern satellite passes over the vast expanses of the Amazon, it reveals a new fragment of the ancient mosaic, confirming what the indigenous people have always known. Their ancestors were not wild nomads, but talented builders, inspired poets, and wise keepers of this green kingdom. When the gaze glides over the emerald abyss of the Amazon forests from a bird's eye view, it is not just wildlife that appears before the eyes. Hidden in this mesmerizing landscape are forgotten cities whose streets once bustled with life, whose markets resounded with ringing voices, whose nights were lit by the light of torches and the glimmer of stars. They disappeared like a mirage, but their legacy has not sunken into oblivion. The Amazon carefully preserves them in every curl of fog, in every splash of a river wave, in every rustle of foliage, whispering stories of past grandeur to those who are willing to listen. Chapter 7 portrays the Amazon as both a temple and an adversary. The Amazon is not merely a waterway, but an entire universe operating under its own laws. Its pristine forests are not just picturesque backdrops or settings for legends and expeditions. They are a living, breathing organism with its own consciousness, where every element is interconnected in a complex web of symbiotic relationships and a constant struggle for survival. In this wild realm, every drop of moisture, every towering tree, every fleeting shadow holds a duality, salvation and imminent demise. There is no clear boundary between nature and humanity. All elements are part of a unified, global system where only those who grasp its harsh rules survive. Otherwise, they vanish without a trace. The majestic Amazon stretches across an area exceeding 7 million square kilometers. Its impenetrable forests encompass the lands of 9 countries, with Brazil undoubtedly at the heart of this natural kingdom. According to scientists, the Amazon biome is home to approximately 10% of all known species on our planet. This impressive diversity includes over 3 million species of insects, around 40,000 species of plants, more than 2,200 species of fish, and countless mammals, reptiles, and birds. Most remarkably, a significant portion of this biodiversity remains terra incognita to science. Every year, dozens of previously unknown organisms are discovered in the Amazon, from microscopic fungi and vibrant frogs to plants with unique medicinal properties and even new species of mammals. This corner of the planet rightly holds the title of one of the last unexplored frontiers, where scientific discoveries are made almost blindly. However, behind the alluring aura of mystery lies a harsh price. The rainforest does not tolerate negligence or mistakes. It can bestow invaluable knowledge and healing, or it can take life in an instant. Poison lurks at every turn, in the striking colors of a poison dart frog, in the succulent fruit of an exotic plant, in the bite of an inconspicuous insect. There are no harmless touches here. Some species of ants possess paralyzing venom, and consuming certain mushrooms can lead to hallucinations and respiratory arrest. Water that appears crystal clear may be contaminated with pathogenic bacteria, causing fever and blood poisoning. Even the plant world fiercely defends itself. Some plants release clouds of acrid aroma into the air, while others entwine with their stems, clinging and suffocating. Legendary predators also inhabit this realm. The jaguar an elusive, nocturnal hunter revered and feared by all indigenous peoples of the Amazon, can silently stalk even in the densest thicket and deliver a fatal blow without warning. The anaconda, reaching impressive lengths of over 6 meters, can suffocate an adult human. The electric eel, generating a discharge of up to 600 volts, is not a figment of imagination, but a reality. Piranhas, contrary to popular belief, rarely attack humans, but under certain circumstances, they become deadly creatures. Tapirs, anteaters, capybaras, bats, pink dolphins, and spiders the size of dinner plates are all integral parts of this vast, teeming cauldron of life hidden beneath the canopy of the rainforest. And yet, amidst this realm, where death and fear go hand in hand, lies indescribable beauty. The Amazon emerges as a grand symphony filled with a multitude of sounds, from the chirping of beetles calling their mates to the melodious trills of birds and the iridescent voices of frogs. The air is thick with the scents of damp earth, wood resin, decaying leaves, and fragrant flowers. The light filtering through the dense foliage resembles rays piercing through the vaults of a temple. In this place, one can experience a new birth, feeling not just like a human being, but like a cell in an enormous living organism, part of something infinite and incomprehensible. For the indigenous tribes inhabiting these lands, the forest is not a wild and hostile territory, but a home, albeit one that demands strict adherence to its laws. It cannot be conquered, only respected for its strength and wisdom. Many rites and rituals are dedicated to appeasing the spirits residing in plants and animals. A fruit gatherer or a hunter, before taking anything from the forest, offers apologies, utters prayers, and makes offerings. Violation of these unwritten rules is punished not by a shaman, but by the forest itself, which sees and knows all. It is this unique combination of danger and beauty, harmony and terror, that transforms the Amazon from a mere geographical feature into something metaphysical, transcending ordinary understanding. Europeans who first ventured into its depths described a strange sense of alienation and the realization that they were outside of time and space. It was not an exaggeration, as familiar categories and perceptions of the world disappear within the jungle. Night in the Amazon takes on entirely different characteristics, surpassing the ordinary idea of it. It seems darker, richer, and more all-encompassing. Daytime loses its usual division into morning and evening hours, turning into a continuous, humid veil that envelops everything around. Space here is organized not horizontally, but vertically. Soil, shrubs, vines, trees, their crowns, and the sky exist in layers, superimposed on each other like an ancient palimpsest. Surprisingly, it is precisely this untamed force of nature, its vibrant life and unpredictability, that have kept colonizers from deeply penetrating the Amazon for centuries. Unlike the mountainous regions of the Andes, where it was possible to build fortifications, construct cities, and create administrative centers, here everything dissolves and disappears without a trace. Any structure falls into disrepair in a matter of months. Stone becomes covered with moss, wood rots, metal is affected by rust. Civilization does not triumph here, but gradually fades away. Even modern cities located along the banks of the Amazon, such as Manaus or Iquitos, are constantly battling the advancing forest, which devours everything in its path, destroys asphalt surfaces, and penetrates concrete structures. Perhaps this is where the greatness of this unique nature lies. It teaches not conquest, but harmonious coexistence, not domination, but adaptation. There is no room for arrogance here, only a careful attitude towards the surrounding world. The forest, like a living being, enters into dialogue with those who know how to listen, whether it is the rustling of leaves, the touch of a humid wind, or nocturnal melodies that can stop time. Nature appears as a majestic temple without walls, but at the same time, it can turn into an enemy for those who invade its domain with weapons, noise, and fear. It tests everyone, checking if they are worthy of becoming a part of it. And if a person passes this test, nature opens its arms, and then it is impossible to forget its pulse, which becomes a part of the person themselves. The chapter, Shamans and Spirits of the Great Water, tells of those who dwell in places where the river turns into a mirror-like surface at sunset, where trees hold silent conversations in an unknown language, where night becomes not just darkness, but a portal between worlds. These are the shamans of the Amazon, not healers or sorcerers in the usual sense, but rather interpreters of the forest, intermediaries between the visible world and what is hidden in its foliage, roots, branches, and sounds. In their view, the river is a vein of the planet through which not only water flows, but also dreams, spirits, thoughts, memories, and destinies. Shamanism is not just a profession, but rather a calling, predetermined by a sign of fate. Often, a child marked by an unusual dream or illness is seen as chosen by the spirits. He is taken by the elders, and a long path of learning begins, including years of solitude, meditation, trials, and dreams. The body of the future shaman undergoes purification. His diet becomes restricted, and contact with ordinary life is minimized. He learns to hear, see, distinguish, and speak in unison with the rhythms of leaf and water, comprehending the wisdom of plants. At the heart of Amazonian shamanic practices lies a deep understanding of the plant kingdom, whose mystical properties are revered as teachers, guides, and spiritualized entities. Among this diversity, ayahuasca stands out. Not just a plant, but a sacred drink, born from the harmonious union of the Banisteriopsis caapi vine and the leaves of psychotropic shrubs, such as chacruna or psychotria. Surprisingly, these plants do not possess the transformative power individually that they acquire together, opening doors to other dimensions. How ancient Amazonian shamans managed to unravel this complex formula among countless plants is a mystery guarded by time. The ayahuasca ceremony is a ritual of initiation, a rite of spiritual rebirth. It usually takes place under the cover of night, in an atmosphere of deep silence and concentration. The shaman, like a conductor of an invisible orchestra, performs ikaros, sacred chants received in mystical dreams or through revelations of spirits. These melodies are not just musical accompaniment, they become a guiding thread, leading consciousness through labyrinths of space, protecting from dangers, cleansing from defilement, and indicating the right path. The participant in the ayahuasca ceremony meets face-to-face with himself, with his hidden fears, dark sides of personality, and innermost desires. He may see the faces of ancestors, feel the presence of totem animals, decipher ancient symbols, take a fascinating journey through starry roads, hear the breath of the forest itself. Some witness giant snakes, others see pulsating light, and still others experience a kaleidoscope of their own deaths and births. The intensity and depth of experiences depend entirely on a person's willingness to heed the voice of their inner world and the wisdom of ancient forces. However, for the indigenous peoples inhabiting the Amazon rainforest, ayahuasca is not merely a psychoactive substance, as it is often perceived in the Western world, but a sacred portal to other dimensions. Shamans use this brew not for mystical visions, but to establish a deep connection with the spirits dwelling in plants, rivers, stars, and the souls of ancestors. Such communication requires the highest responsibility, thorough preparation, and spiritual purity from the shaman. It is not enough to simply drink ayahuasca in the hope of instantly grasping the truth. Without proper preparation, the uninitiated risk not finding enlightenment, but falling prey to their own fears and delusions. In addition to ayahuasca, shamans have a multitude of other plants in their arsenal, each possessing unique properties. Some are used to heal wounds, neutralize poisons, and combat fever, while others are used to develop intuition, increase luck in hunting, and control dreams. There are also plants that shamans smoke during rituals to summon rain or lift curses. Some vines, shamans believe, can transmit the voices of ancestors. It is important to note that all these plants are perceived as living beings, possessing their own character, name, and mood. In shamanic cosmology, each plant is a personality, requiring respectful treatment, communication through songs and prayers, requests, and gratitude. Without knowing the plant's name, it is impossible to access its power. Shamans also pay close attention to working with dreams. It is believed that spirits can enter dreams, conveying messages, warnings, or tasks. Some ceremonies are conducted directly in dreams when a person's consciousness leaves the body and encounters the invisible world. Dreams are not seen as products of fantasy, but as real journeys in which one can forget, lose, return, or change something. A shaman is not just a healer, but a true guardian of the harmony of the universe. He possesses the unique ability to sense the slightest imbalances in the natural rhythm, whether it be the premature shallowing of a river, the unusual behavior of animals, or the ominous silence of the heavens. It is in his power to appeal to the spirits to restore lost equilibrium, to converse with the rain itself, and to find paths hidden from the ordinary gaze. In pivotal moments of history, whether it be epidemics, famine, or bloody wars, it is to the shaman that people turn for wise counsel. Often, it is he who makes fateful decisions, when to leave their native lands, with whom to form an alliance, and whom to trust with their lives. Since the 9th century, Western researchers have repeatedly attempted to understand the phenomenon of shamanism. Some approached it with purely scientific interest, others with arrogant disdain. Some saw shamans as mere skilled deceivers, while others saw them as healers of human souls lost in the jungle. However, few realized that the shamanic system is not simply a body of knowledge or a set of magical recipes, but a special way of existing in a world where the boundaries between reality and the other world are constantly blurred, like the changing waters of the Amazon. In the 21st century, interest in shamanism has flared up with renewed vigor. People from all corners of the planet flock to Peru, Brazil, and Colombia to participate in mysterious ceremonies. Some seek healing from ailments, some seek lost meanings in life, and some simply crave thrills. However, wise elders warn, ayahuasca is not a miraculous cure, but a harsh examination. The forest will carefully observe whether you are ready to meet the unknown. In the depths of the Amazonian jungle, where reality intertwines with myths, there is no distinction between the ordinary and the miraculous. Everything is one and interconnected. A waterway can appear in the guise of a giant snake. An ancient tree can be the embodiment of a progenitor, and gusts of wind can be the voice of spirits. The shaman here is not an all-powerful ruler, but a humble servant of the forest, its sensitive ear and herald. Through him, nature itself pours out its thoughts. Through him, the river tells its stories. And if a traveler is fortunate enough to find himself in the heart of the Amazon and hear strange chants born in the impenetrable darkness of the night, he should not be afraid. It is not an ominous warning, but a friendly greeting. It is quite possible that the inhabitants of the other world already know the guest's name. Perhaps the forest itself has entered into a silent dialogue with him. Chapter 9 is dedicated to the dramatic clash of two worlds, European missions and Amazonian culture. From the 16th century onwards, the cross, along with the gleam of steel and the roar of muskets, penetrated the impassable wilderness of the Amazon. Following the ranks of conquistadors came missionaries, bringing with them a new faith, religious trepidation, writing a foreign language, and, as they sincerely believed, deliverance from sins. They were not looking for treasures, but souls. However, the clash between the Christian worldview and the way of life of Amazonian tribes proved no less tragic than conquest by arms. It was a true battle of ideologies, a collision of different ways of expressing thoughts, ideas about time, life, death, and the very purpose of human existence. Immediately following the triumphant march of the conquistadors, the first missionaries, representing the Dominican, Franciscan, Augustinian, and Jesuit orders, arrived in Peru and Brazil. By the 1540s, their activity had spread to coastal and riverine areas where they erected the first missions, modest wooden chapels, schools, and shelters that became the stronghold of the new faith. Their goal was not simply to convert the indigenous people to Christianity, but to radically transform their entire existence, including clothing, lifestyle, food, language, and moral principles. The missionaries sincerely believed that it was their duty to save these peoples from savagery and guide them onto the path of civilization, since everything beyond the Christian world seemed to them either delusion or the machinations of evil forces. Resistance to the imposed culture was hidden but profound. Local shamans saw in the missionaries not only competitors but possibly allies. Some of them tried to adapt Christian ideas to their cosmology, presenting Jesus as a spirit of light, the cross as a sacred tree, and God as a great ancestor speaking from the heavens. However, the Church rejected such interpretations, insisting on the literal acceptance of dogmas, baptism, and the rejection of pagan rituals. This included a ban on rituals using ayahuasca, the destruction of images of spirits, a ban on traditional songs and dances, and separate education of children by gender. Missions often represented closed settlements where converts lived under the constant supervision of priests and soldiers. These reductions, especially in the Jesuit areas of Paraguay, Bolivia, and Brazil, served simultaneously as schools, economic complexes, and unique cultural filters. Locals were taught agriculture, crafts, Latin writing, confession, and church chants. Outwardly, this looked like prosperity and order, but inside reigned restriction of freedom, a ban on the use of native languages, the loss of historical memory, and forced submission. It seemed that the voice of the ancient spirit of the forest had fallen silent forever. However, not all missionaries should be portrayed solely as religious fanatics. Among them were inquisitive researchers, attentive observers, and chroniclers who showed due respect for the culture and traditions of indigenous peoples. One such outstanding figure was José de Acosta, a Jesuit who lived in the late 16th century, whose works contain invaluable descriptions of local rituals, languages, and natural features. Later, in the 17th century, the chronicles of Jesuit missions in Peru and the Amazon are striking in their detailed accounts of shamanic duels, encounters with mysterious, invisible settlements, mentions of birds that make sounds resembling children's laughter, and people with the gift of communicating with fire. These records are, in essence, some of the first ethnographic testimonies capturing life in the Amazon. Nevertheless, it must be recognized that the general line of missionary activity was colonial in nature, aimed at a deep transformation of the individual. Often this process was accompanied by various forms of violence, physical, moral, and ritual. The cross, a sacred symbol of faith, often turned into an instrument of coercion and suppression. The history of the Amazon records numerous cases of the forced baptism of entire tribes, and those who refused to accept the new faith were expelled from their native settlements or enslaved. Women were forced to hide their bodies under clothing, depriving them of the opportunity to wear traditional jewelry, and men were forced to abandon tattoos and ritual dances. Children were instilled with a sense of shame for their parents and convinced of the falsity of shamanism. In addition, deadly diseases came to the lands of indigenous peoples along with the missionaries, taking the lives of entire generations. even the most well-intentioned and sincere priests carried an invisible threat, becoming unwitting harbingers of death. Fierce epidemics of smallpox, influenza, typhus, and measles mercilessly devastated entire settlements of indigenous peoples long before the first detachments of soldiers invaded their lands. In the minds of some tribes, this series of tragic events took the form of a sinister curse. With the arrival of white people, the guardian spirits have left us. Others saw this as a severe test sent from above. There were also those who perceived death as a harbinger of great transformation. There are fewer and fewer of us, and one day we will turn into shadows to settle forever in the roots of trees. In a desperate attempt to resist the impending threat, some shamans raised the banner of spiritual warfare against Christian missions. They engaged in secluded rituals, striving to protect the sacred forests from outsiders. Indigenous legends have passed down stories of great eclipses when rivers stopped flowing, wild animals vanished into impenetrable thickets, and everything around fell into an ominous silence, an omen foretelling the departure of spirits. In certain regions, despair erupted into open rebellion. Villagers succumbed to furious anger, burning hated chapels to the ground, fleeing deep into impassable forests, and rejecting the Christian names imposed upon them. Without directly confronting the invaders, they chose the tactic of disappearance, dissolving into the green chaos of the jungle. This form of silent resistance, as if woven from the very nature of the forest, became their only weapon. And yet, despite the tragedy of the clash between two worlds, it held not only destruction, but also mutual enrichment. Cultural images intertwined, giving rise to bizarre hybrids. The Virgin Mary, revered by the Christian world, merged in the minds of the indigenous people with the spirit of water, the giver of life. The cross, a symbol of the faith of newcomers, was associated with the four cardinal directions, pointing the way in the boundless expanses of the Amazon. Some tribes adopted the rites of Catholicism, imbuing them with their own innermost meaning. Thus, a new, unique spirituality was born, a forest Christian mythology in which saints wandered along forest paths, Jesus dwelt in the foliage of trees, and the apostles fished in the countless tributaries of the great river. However, the fundamental contradiction between perceiving the forest as a sacred gift and as a mere resource, between spiritual contemplation and the pursuit of earthly goods, between conquering nature and harmoniously coexisting with it, did not disappear. With the beginning of the 19th century and the weakening of the power of the Spanish and Portuguese empires, many missionary settlements fell into disrepair. At the same time, a new chapter opened in the history of the relationship between Western civilization and the virgin forests of the Amazon. Colonial possessions began to transform into independent states. Brazil, Peru, and Colombia gained sovereignty. And although the political landscape underwent changes, the entrenched view of the Amazon as an unused space intended for development persisted. Consequently, missionary activity continued. Catholic orders were replaced by Protestant missionaries, who were particularly active in the 20th century. They used not so much brute force and intimidation as the rhetoric of progress and modernization. They provided medical assistance, distributed books, and new technologies. They taught how to build houses, work with machines, and read the Bible. In some settlements, this was perceived as charity, in others as another form of intrusive interference in their traditional way of life. The new wave of Christianization was often accompanied by the forced removal of children from their families who were sent to missionary schools to be raised in accordance with civilized norms. Many of these children forever lost touch with their roots and never returned to their native lands. The forest was deprived of entire generations who were taught to be ashamed of their names, native languages, physical appearance, and historical heritage. However, the forest did not forget what it had experienced. In the 20th century, a response movement emerged, an era of resistance and spiritual revival. The first associations of indigenous peoples arose, boldly declaring their inalienable rights to the land of their ancestors, their native language, and their traditional faith. Shamans, who had long kept their sacred knowledge secret, began to open up to the world, driven not by a desire for recognition, but by a deep sense of urgent necessity. They realized that if they did not pass on their knowledge to future generations, there would be no one to preserve the precious heritage. Some of them even entered into dialogue with church ministers, persistently emphasizing, "We also have a God, only He speaks to us in the language of trees, the rustling of leaves, and the murmur of rivers." Thus, a unique hybrid spirituality arose, in which Christian symbols and ancient Amazonian archetypes were intricately intertwined. In some settlements, you can see temples where crucifixes and images of forest spirits coexist on the altar, where the priest performs Icaros, sacred songs of indigenous peoples, during Mass, where ayahuasca is presented as Holy Communion, and the Virgin Mary is revered as Mother Liana, the powerful guardian of rivers and waters. This is not a manifestation of heresy, but rather a profound restructuring of worldview, in which the Western and forest principles strive for harmonious coexistence. A special place in this process is occupied by the phenomenon of Santo Daime, a unique religion that originated in Brazil in the early 20th century. Its founder was Raimundo Irineu Serra, formerly an ordinary rubber plantation worker. History knows examples when a chance revelation becomes the spark for the birth of an entire spiritual movement. A rubber plantation worker, after experiencing ayahuasca at the hands of indigenous people, underwent a profound spiritual experience. Inspired by this revelation, he began to synthesize Christian worship with the use of the sacred drink, creating his own hymns, developing rituals, and forming a community known as Santo Daime. This ayahuasca church, filled with the sounds of marches, prayers, and visionary chants, places the inner experience of light at the center of its ritual. Subsequently, this movement went beyond the local community and spread throughout Latin America, reaching the USA and Europe, becoming a kind of bridge. Between the mysticism of the forest depths and the modern global spiritual scene, however, not everyone welcomed these changes. Government authorities and church institutions have repeatedly attempted to ban ceremonies, rituals, and independent schools associated with ayahuasca. In some regions, shamans are still persecuted, called doctors of the devil, subjected to intimidation, and sometimes they disappear altogether. Nevertheless, the 21st century marked an era of open resistance. Today, indigenous peoples are creating their own universities, where they study both their ancient traditions and the achievements of Western science. They are training a new generation of shamans, while simultaneously developing laws to protect their culture and rights. Participating in international environmental summits, they represent not just a narrow group of interests, but a holistic worldview in which the river is a living being, the earth is a mother, and the tree is a close relative. There is a formation of associations that go beyond individual faiths. Some Catholic clergy in Latin America are showing solidarity with the indigenous population, finding in their traditional way of life a deep correspondence with evangelical principles. In 2019, Pope Francis initiated the Synod on the Amazon, which became a representative forum for bishops and delegates from indigenous peoples living in the region. It is important to note that for the first time in the history of such meetings, the emphasis was not on missionary activity, but on exploring opportunities for the Church to listen to the needs of the Amazon and not just broadcast its own attitudes. Synod participants acknowledged mistakes made in the past, expressed regret for acts of violence, and reaffirmed the right of indigenous peoples to preserve and develop their unique culture. Nevertheless, even in the 21st century, the confrontation over the future of the Amazon continues. The lands that are home to shamans and hold their spiritual heritage are subjected to ruthless exploitation, deforestation, mining, road construction, and the emergence of settlements. The spiritual value of these places is simply ignored. Various stakeholders hold diametrically opposed views on the forest. For some, it is just a source of resources. For others, a valuable heritage. And for indigenous peoples, a living ancestor. These contradictions result in real conflicts, manifested in the destruction of settlements, clashes in protected areas, lawsuits, as well as in songs and rituals that reflect the pain and hope of indigenous residents. Despite all the difficulties, the shamans of the Amazon continue their work. Their voices are heard in songs, rituals are performed, and the message passed down from generation to generation remains unchanged. The river is alive, the forest is alive, and man is an integral part of this great living organism. As long as this knowledge continues to be transmitted, even in a whisper, even in the face of death, the Amazon retains its identity and remembers its purpose. In the 21st century, the Amazon, which seemed an impregnable citadel of nature, faced the threat of extinction. What for centuries was perceived as an unshakable given turned out to be fragile in the face of modern challenges. Not the sword and spear, but the chainsaw, asphalt, and the thirst for profit became the tools undermining its greatness. This great green artery of the planet, the cradle of civilizations, a source of myths and inspiration for songs, is increasingly mentioned in alarming reports as an area of ecological disaster. According to official data, since the 1970s, the Amazon has lost more than 800,000 square kilometers of forest, which is comparable to the territory of a state like Turkey. The main reason for this barbaric deforestation is the expansion of agricultural land for soybeans, cattle breeding, and palm oil production. Behind every hectare of destroyed forest are multi-million-dollar contracts, transnational corporations, corruption schemes, imperfect legislation, and a ruthless mechanism of the global market. In place of centuries-old trees, pastures now stretch, and once picturesque streams have turned into canals directing water into industrial reservoirs. Of particular danger to the Amazon are mining companies seeking to extract gold, oil, and natural gas. In the Peruvian region of Madre de Dios, for example, illegal gold mining has led to irreversible landscape changes. Rivers are poisoned with mercury, indigenous villages are disappearing, and ecosystems are on the brink of complete destruction. A similar situation is observed in the Brazilian states of Amazonas and Pará, where once rich forests are turning into a lifeless desert. Shamans are raising the alarm, warning of the sickness of the earth, the silenced river, and the disappearing birds. These are not just poetic metaphors, but a harsh diagnosis indicating a deep crisis. The original inhabitants of the land are the first to feel the devastating consequences of the ecological catastrophe. Today, in the heart of the Amazon, there are about 400 distinctive ethnic groups speaking more than 300 unique languages. However, with each year, these languages fade into oblivion. Cultures disappear without a trace, and the younger generation leaves their native lands in search of a better life in the cities, losing the precious connection to traditional rituals. Shamans, the keepers of ancient knowledge, pass away without leaving behind any disciples. Unfortunately, some peoples have completely disappeared in recent decades, not because of genocide as in previous centuries, but because of a subtle dissolution into a faceless market culture. Their voices are no longer heard. Their existence is forgotten, even though they once were. Nevertheless, many communities continue to fight desperately for survival. Activists from among the indigenous people themselves are taking the initiative, creating schools, developing educational materials, producing animated films in their native languages, and even translating the Bible and the Constitution into the languages of their tribes. They meticulously map their territories, marking sacred sites, ancient ancestral trails, and animal habitats. They turn to the courts, filing lawsuits against state corporations, and speak at international summits, trying to draw attention to their problems. Some of them receive prestigious awards, while others disappear under unexplained circumstances. The issue of land rights is of particular importance. Many indigenous communities live on their land without any official documents confirming their property rights. This means that, from a legal point of view, they do not exist. Any company can freely come and say, "There will be logging here, and we will build a mine here." And if the village is not legally recognized, then it does not exist. Protecting the forest begins with recognizing the rights of those people who have carefully protected it for centuries. Recognizing the rights of nature is not just a formal signing of legal acts. It is a profound question that touches upon the very essence of human perception of the world. Let's ask ourselves, do we see in the forest only a resource that has its price, or do we hear its own unique voice? It is on this basis of ideological disagreements that new social movements are emerging, striving to protect the environment. One of the most striking examples is the organization Guardiões da Floresta, Guardians of the Forest. These informal detachments, consisting of young representatives of indigenous peoples, have taken on the mission of patrolling their territories. They actively resist illegal logging, erect barricades on roads, blocking access to violators, and conduct independent investigations of crimes against nature. Their arsenal includes modern technologies, such as drones and satellite systems, as well as traditional tools, such as machetes and ancient rituals. These people protect not just the land as a territory, but also its spiritual essence. For them, the river is the progenitor, the tree is a wise elder, and the native language is the very soul of the people. They are not revolutionaries in the classical sense of the word. Rather, they are the living pulse of the earth, desperately fighting for their right to exist, for the opportunity to breathe freely. However, the struggle to preserve the Amazon is happening not only from the outside, but also within the indigenous communities. In many villages, conflicts erupt between supporters of preserving the traditional way of life and those who strive for development and modernization. The latter advocate for the construction of modern schools, connection to the internet, and the creation of TikTok channels where they share their rituals and culture with the world. This process cannot be called the destruction of traditions. It is rather an evolution, a modernization of the forest, where a shaman can conduct rituals online via Zoom, and a young member of the tribe can film a dance to the sounds of Icaros on a smartphone camera. The Amazon is learning to speak in new languages, using modern means of communication, but at the same time desperately trying to preserve its ancient breath, its unique connection with nature, and spiritual roots. The world community is increasingly watching the fate of the Amazon. A couple of years ago, at the Paris Climate Summit, it was stated that the preservation of these unique tropical forests is one of the priorities of the current century. Brazil receives significant financial investments for environmental initiatives, yet simultaneously continues to increase exports of livestock products and soybeans. This dissonance between declarations of environmental responsibility and actual economic policy is a key problem. The Amazon represents a valuable resource, attracting the attention of political figures and investors seeking to profit from it. Despite this, the region continues to live. Every surviving tree is an achievement. Every child who has mastered the language of their ancestors is a beacon of hope. Every melody sounding over the river reminds us that the forest is still alive, and with it, so are we. The Amazon is not just a geographical location, it is a reflection of the state of our planet, a kind of mirror in which our essence is reflected. And if this mirror breaks, we cannot fail to notice. The Amazon does not need saving and is not a defenseless victim. It is a powerful force that for centuries has fed, protected, and shown patience. But now it is sending a signal. Listen or disappear. This is not a threat, but a statement of fact that we can still realize. Mysterious inhabitants of unmarked lands, on the invisible peoples of the Amazon. In the heart of the Amazon's virgin forests, where impenetrable jungles conceal secrets from prying eyes, live amazing tribes that elude the attention of the modern world. These peoples, referred to as uncontacted or isolated, prefer to remain in the shadows, preserving the way of life of their ancestors rooted in millennia past. Their existence is shrouded in mystery, and the few pieces of evidence of their presence only emphasize their desire for solitude. Despite the lack of precise information, researchers and locals sense their invisible presence. Satellite images have sometimes revealed traces of their activity. Longhouses made of palm leaves lost in the thickets, clearings cut through dense vegetation, and areas where cassava is cultivated. These signs indicate the existence of settlements far from tourist routes and hidden from outsiders, where time seems to have stood still and modernity has no power. According to FUNAI, the Brazilian government organization that defends the rights of indigenous peoples, there are over 100 such isolated groups in the Amazon basin. Some of them have never had contact with the outside world, while others have had episodic contact in the past, after which they retreated back into the forest wilderness, seeking to avoid the influence of civilization. The question of their origin remains open, but most researchers agree that these peoples are descendants of those who fled from European conquerors, who brought with them not only weapons and religious dogmas, but also deadly diseases. Subsequently, they moved further and further into the forests, fleeing from missionaries, schools, logging, and the slave trade. For centuries, with each new turn of civilization, they retreated further, preserving their identity and independence away from the rest of the world. These peoples, who have avoided contact with modern civilization, are not backward savages, but rather survivors who carefully preserve fragments of knowledge about a world where humanity existed in harmony with nature, rather than striving to control it. Their existence is not fiction, but a reality confirmed by satellite intelligence data, testimonies from pilots who have spotted their fires, and stories from shamans of nearby tribes who catch echoes of their songs. Sometimes these tribes make themselves known, appearing on the outskirts of inhabited places to exchange ornaments for bananas or seize machetes. In other cases, they show aggression, shooting at strangers, sometimes as a warning, sometimes inflicting fatal wounds. However, their hostility is not a manifestation of cruelty, but a way of protecting their way of life. Imagine a situation. A person lives in a forest where everything is interconnected, spirits, animals, rituals, and suddenly a stranger appears, dressed in unnatural fabrics, carrying strange objects, emitting a smell of burning, and bringing death with him. After his visit, children begin to die from diseases. Old people lose their speech. Trees wither. What will be the reaction? It is natural to want to hide, to forbid children to approach the river, to hang amulets on the paths, to dissolve into the forest thicket so that the forest takes them back. Instead of firearms, these tribes use invisibility as a means of protection. They possess the art of disappearing, dissolving among the trees. Their paths are invisible, their dwellings blend in with the foliage. Communication takes place through gestures, signs, and smells. They retain the memory of what man was like when he did not yet strive for world domination, but simply lived in harmony with nature. In their language, there are no concepts such as internet, progress, or state, but there are words describing the silence after a thunderstorm, the harmony of sounds of the night forest, and memories of the smell of a tree. Their mythology includes not only spirits, but also tales of danger from the outside world. Sometimes this danger is referred to as the light people because of their lanterns and fire, sometimes as the noise people, and sometimes simply as them. In Brazil, Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, and Bolivia officially recognized the existence of isolated tribes, creating inviolable zones for them. These territories, where even state services are forbidden to enter, are designed to protect the unique way of life of these peoples. However, despite the established protection perimeters and legislative acts, the reality is harsh. Poachers, drug traffickers, and illegal gold miners invade these lands, sowing chaos and destruction. They exterminate animals, pollute water resources, build roads, bringing disease and death. The tragic incident that occurred in 2016 in the Javari River region of Brazil serves as a vivid example of this cruel reality. A group of illegal gold miners, penetrating deep into the territory, coldly dealt with several representatives of the indigenous population, throwing their bodies into the river. The crime remained unpunished because the victims had neither documents nor names in the censuses, nor rights. They were no one in the eyes of the system, but they existed, and their departure is an irreplaceable loss. Despite their vulnerability, these peoples continue to live, breathe, and preserve their culture. They raise children, sing songs, hunt, and look at the stars, remembering the world before the arrival of civilization. As long as they are alive, this world also exists, hidden from prying eyes, but not gone. Shamans of contact tribes claim that the invisible is the soul of the forest, its last voice. They believe that the disappearance of the last of these tribes will lead to the silence of the river, the departure of spirits, and the disruption of balance. After all, a person who has forgotten his roots turns into a phantom, devoid of his true essence. There are peoples to whom it is better not to approach, and in this case, ignorance becomes a blessing, protecting their peace. If fate takes you to the vicinity of the territories inhabited by these uncontacted groups, stop and listen to the silence. Perhaps behind the dense foliage of trees, there are glances, full not of hostility, but of a plea to preserve their privacy, to protect them from destruction and unwanted interference in their unique existence. Perhaps the most reasonable step that humanity can take is to retreat, providing at least one corner on the planet where a person can remain simply a human, devoid of identification, nationality, the fetters of the World Wide Web, but only an integral part of nature, as it was at the dawn of civilization. Chapter 11 of the book is dedicated to a journey along the Amazon, originating in glaciers and ending in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Imagine that you are at an altitude of more than 5,000 meters above sea level, where, among rocky peaks and icy expanses, the piercing wind burns your face, creating the feeling of being not on Earth, but on the border of the heavens. This is the majestic Andes, the Peruvian part of the Cordillera, from which the greatest water journey on the planet originates. It is here, from a modest stream breaking through the rocks, that the Amazon is born. The author invites readers to take an imaginary journey along its course, through the prism of time, the diversity of cultures, mysterious secrets, and the unique atmosphere of the rainforest. The initial kilometers of the journey along the river are marked by a meeting with mountain streams, whose waters are crystal clear, fast-flowing, and turbulent, as if embodying the youth of the river itself. Travelers pass high mountain pastures and authentic Peruvian villages, where local residents, faithful to the traditions of their ancestors, still communicate in the Quechua language and offer prayers to Apu, the spirits inhabiting the mountain peaks. In these parts, the river does not yet bear the proud name of the Amazon, but is modestly called Marañón or Ucayali, representing a complex system of tributaries, each of which is shrouded in a veil of ancient myths and fascinating legends. Sounds coming from afar caress the ear. A shepherd sings his morning song, and the echo, as if echoing him, spreads through the mountain gorges. A raft, like a toy in the hands of fate, sways on the waves of time, carrying travelers further and further. As it descends from the mountains, the river penetrates into the warm and humid foothills, where travelers are greeted by the first signs of the jungle: lush ferns, exotic bromeliads, nimble lizards, and deafening cries of monkeys as if welcoming uninvited guests at the gates of an unexplored world. The intoxicating aroma of damp earth and decaying leaves hovers in the air, creating a unique atmosphere. The raft glides past the bizarre roots of trees, which, like giant snakes, stretch straight to the water. A sudden splash breaks the silence. It's a pink dolphin, like an embodiment of a dream, momentarily appears on the surface and then disappears without a trace into the depths. At night, mysterious sounds echo, resembling either human singing or the calls of exotic birds. In these places, the river seems to find a new voice, deeper and more enigmatic. The first settlements appear on the riverbanks, and travelers decide to stop. The locals greet them with welcoming smiles and invite them into their humble huts. The village elder recounts a legend of how his grandfather sailed down the river with a shaman who possessed the gift of communicating with anacondas. To confirm his words, he shows the guests ancient drawings on the walls, which are not a geographical map, but rather a mythological representation of the area. Here, according to the elder, dwells the spirit of thunder, and in a certain place, the river mysteriously disappears underground. The guests are treated to baked fish, manioc, and a decoction of medicinal leaves. Everything in this place is imbued with knowledge that cannot be gleaned from books. It can only be felt through personal experience. Once again, the expedition moves forward, and a magnificent panorama of the river opens up, its banks disappearing somewhere beyond the horizon. The travelers pass through a vast delta, where the waterway breaks down into countless channels, forming a complex network resembling the circulatory system of a living organism spread out before their eyes. From a bird's-eye view, this spectacle is breathtaking. Flooded forests that seem to have grown out of the water itself, and feathered creatures soaring through the air with the grace of spirits. The ear picks up a hum emanating from the forest thicket, not metaphorical, but very real, as if the forest is a huge living being and the travelers are merely fleeting guests in its domain. There are also traces of long-gone eras, ancient mounds overgrown with dense vegetation, and mysterious reliefs clearly not created by nature. Locals pass down legends of stone people who once inhabited these lands. Venturing deeper, the researchers find fragments of ancient pottery and patches of dark, fertile soil, terra preta, holding the memory of past times. This is not just soil, but a tangible connection to the past that can be felt in the palm of your hand. Sometimes the expedition encounters large cities, Iquitos, Manaus, with their bright lights, bustling steamboats, incessant noise, colorful advertising, and gray concrete jungles. But even here, in these centers of modern civilization, one can feel the elusive breath of the river. In the local markets, they actively trade in medicinal remedies made from roots and amulets made from dried frogs. People still turn to shamans for help, even though they wear t-shirts with the emblems of famous soccer clubs. In this region, two realities intertwine. Modernity and wilderness coexist side by side, like a hand and its shadow, creating a unique and captivating contrast. Deep in the Amazon rainforest, a group of researchers witnesses a meeting with an expedition of young ecologists. Their faces are full of determination, and their words sound like an alarm. They are studying endangered plant species, and time is running out. In a decade, they claim, these unique representatives of the flora may disappear forever from the face of the earth. Among the students are those who have left their familiar European lives for a new home in the heart of the Amazon. One of them confesses that he was looking for the exotic, but found something more, himself. Now, he says, going back seems impossible. Similar stories about people finding their calling far from home are becoming more frequent. The travelers arrive in an area where a community has managed to preserve its language, incomprehensible to the rest of the world. Their culture is rich and unique. They distinguish every shade of water, every state of the sky, and they have their own words for everything. One of the elders wisely remarks that for white people, the river is just a road, but for them, it is a path inward into the depths of the soul and understanding of the world. These words make one think, and in the ensuing silence, an understanding of the depth of what has been said comes. On special nights, when the sky is clear and the stars are reflected in the dark water, the guide, a shaman named Elder, begins to sing Icaros, traditional songs. His voice, full of strength and wisdom, dissolves into the night silence. At this moment, the travelers begin to hear sounds that had previously gone unnoticed. The beating of a tree's heart, the movement of a fish in the depths, the breath of the wind passing over the river. They are no longer just tourists. They have become part of a living organism, and this organism has accepted them into itself. At the end of the journey, when the Amazon reaches its maximum width, exceeding 40 kilometers, a slow sadness comes instead of the expected joy. No one wants this amazing adventure to end. Looking back, they see the path they have traveled: cities, impenetrable forests, spirits, open and vanished people. There is a feeling that a part of themselves remains here, in the Amazon, and in return, the river leaves a part of itself in their hearts. In the heart of the Atlantic Ocean, where salt water meets the freshwater embrace of rivers, where the mighty current loses its banks in the vast expanse, observers stand at the edge of the boat, gazing into the boundless distance. Words are unnecessary, for they share a common knowledge: the experience of being in places where the earth still holds echoes of ancient dreams. Chapter 12 tells of the image of the Amazon, imprinted in the dreams of humanity. The Amazon is not just a geographical concept. It is an archetypal image, a symbol, a dream that has haunted humanity for centuries, yet can never be fully realized. It cannot be confined to precise coordinates reduced to dry figures of length, basin width, or rainfall. The Amazon is a myth living in the very body of the planet, and each generation invests it with its innermost fears, hopes, longings, and an unquenchable thirst for knowledge of the unknown. For primitive tribes, the Amazon was a mother, strict but generous with gifts. She provided food, cleansed, and connected disparate villages. Her waters were inhabited by the spirits of ancestors. Her tributaries were the veins of the world. People believed that the river's anger could turn into catastrophe. It would leave, change its course, dry up, taking life with it. They addressed her with prayers, sang her songs, and begged for mercy. The river was alive, not only figuratively, but also literally. And in this, their beliefs found confirmation. Modern scientists have proven that rivers breathe, absorb, and release carbon dioxide, affect the climate, and participate in the global metabolism. In the era of the conquistadors of the 15th century, the Amazon appeared as a real monster, boundless, unfriendly, and full of secrets. Its greatness defied verbal description. In the First Chronicles, it appeared as a river with no end, as a giant snake that had wrapped around an entire continent. Countless people met their deaths on its banks or disappeared without a trace. There were rumors of its magical nature, that immersion in its waters was tantamount to crossing into another dimension. And in a sense, these rumors were not unfounded. No one returned from this green kingdom the same. For the romantics of the 19th century, the Amazon turned into an exotic reverie. It attracted naturalists, poets, and tireless travelers. In its wilderness, they sought an ideal society, legendary vanished races, and missing links in the chain of evolution. Here, they hoped to find pristine nature, the kind that had been irretrievably lost in Europe. Each new novel, each travel essay, and each painting transformed it not just into a geographical place, but into a stage for the search for deeper meaning. However, the forest regarded these attempts with undisguised irony. It never revealed its secrets to those who came only to observe, but opened only to those who were ready to dissolve in its green embrace. In the 20th century, the Amazon became an arena of fierce struggle between progress and preservation, between industrialization and ecology, between colonial greed and the resistance of indigenous peoples. Its image appeared more and more often on movie screens, from exciting adventure films to documentaries about disappearing tribes. The Amazon became a subject of discussion at UN meetings, the main slogan at environmental forums, and a catchy headline on propaganda posters. And, at the same time, it was increasingly erased from the maps of the real world. Satellites recorded relentless deforestation, ancient languages faded away, and unique animals disappeared forever. Paradoxically, the more they talked about the Amazon, the less of it remained. But in parallel with this, another process unfolded. The forest penetrated our essence, enriched mass culture, took root in the subconscious, and became an integral part of dreams. In cinema and literature, the river transformed into a symbol of the unknown, into an element that could not be conquered. In dreams, we glide through emerald waters, contemplate the slender silhouettes of trees, listen to the wild cries of monkeys, and catch a call coming from afar. The source of this voice remains unclear, but it sounds in a language that seemed to have faded from memory, but still echoes in the depths of consciousness. It whispers, "You have been here before. You knew how to listen. Remember." The Amazon appears as an archetype of the Great Mother, both gentle and formidable. It embodies the myth of the hero's journey of plunging into the abyss of chaos and triumphantly returning with new knowledge. It contains everything, heaven and hell, beginning and end. It is a place where one can meet death and find new birth, where individuality dissolves, giving way to a sense of belonging to something all-encompassing, to life itself. Today, its image continues to live and inspire creators. It is reflected in the novel The Lost City of Z, in Werner Herzog's documentaries, in musical compositions that use the sounds of tropical rain and the voices of exotic birds, in visual installations, video games, and poetic works. It inspires designers, architects, and psychologists. Biologists and anthropologists study it. Children who have never seen a river dedicate songs to it. Why? Because it is more than just a geographical place. It is a reminder of a lost connection. And therein lies its irresistible power. It gives us hope. As long as shamans still perform their mystical ekaros on Earth, as long as the night darkness is illuminated by the dance of fireflies, and the morning forest is filled with the rustling of awakening branches, humanity retains a chance to awaken. A chance to remember that we do not rule over nature, but are an integral part of it, that the river and man are one, existing in different forms. The Amazon is not a relic of the past, but a prototype of the future, for which each of us fights in the depths of our own consciousness. This is a crucial choice, to continue living in alienation from nature or to reunite with it, to see the forest only as a source of resources or to recognize it as a wise interlocutor. While there is still an opportunity to make this choice because the Amazon is still alive and waiting not for its end, but for our transformation. Of course, it sees its reflection in each of us, and if one day, closing your eyes, you feel a quiet murmur of water inside you, turning into a call that cannot be described in any language, do not be afraid. It is the Amazon itself knocking on your soul, penetrating into dreams not as a stranger, but as a reminder of your true essence and potential. Thank you for your attention. If there is any inaccuracy in my narrative, I apologize, dear listeners. After all, even the most experienced storyteller is not immune to accidental mistakes. Friends, if this lecture has resonated in your hearts and you want to contribute to the development of our project, you can support us. It will be like a cup of fragrant tea, which will inspire me to create new stories that I can share with you by our warm campfire. The author expresses gratitude for the opportunity to give magic a verbal form. He wishes everyone a good night and the sweetest dreams.